The lawyer's office smelled of old leather and stale coffee, a fitting atmosphere for the reading of a will that would change everything. Margaret Chen sat rigid in the vinyl chair, her 9-year-old daughter Lily pressed against her side, small fingers clutching the fabric of her mother's threadbare coat. At 42, Margaret felt decades older, the kind of exhaustion that settled into bones and refused to leave. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the mahogany desk, where Attorney David Brennan shuffled through documents with practiced efficiency. Across from them sat 3 faces. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. Margaret had hoped never to see again her late husband's brother Robert, his wife Patricia, and their son Brandon, each wearing expressions that ranged from barely concealed contempt to outright hostility. "Thank you all for coming," Brennan began, his voice carrying the neutral tone of someone who had presided over countless family disputes. "We're here for the reading of Harold Chen's will." Margaret's throat tightened at her husband's name. 6 months had passed since the accident on the offshore platform. 6 months of drowning in medical bills, funeral expenses, and the crushing weight of suddenly being alone with a daughter to raise. The life insurance payout had barely covered the debts Harold had accumulated, debts she'd known nothing about until after his death. "Harold's estate is relatively straightforward," Brennan continued, opening the folder before him. "To his brother, Robert Chen, he leaves his coin collection, appraised at approximately $15,000. Robert's satisfied smirk made Margaret's stomach turn. To his wife, Margaret Chen, he leaves his share of the Gulf Star Platform 7, a decommissioned oil rig located 47 miles off the coast of Louisiana." Silence descended on the office, broken only by the tick of an ancient clock on the wall. Patricia was the first to break it, her laughter sharp and cutting. "An oil rig? A decommissioned oil rig?" Her perfectly manicured hand flew to her chest in theatrical disbelief. "Oh, Harold, you really outdid yourself this time." Robert leaned forward, his expensive suit straining across his shoulders. "Margaret, I'm sure you understand that maintaining a derelict structure in the Gulf is going to cost you more than it's worth. The platform's been condemned for 3 years. It's worthless scrap metal." "Actually," Brennan interjected carefully, "there are significant back taxes and maintenance fees associated with the property, approximately $47,000 in outstanding obligations." Margaret felt the blood drain from her face. $47,000. She had $300 in her checking account, and another 2 weeks before the eviction notice on their apartment became final. "This is ridiculous," Patricia declared, standing abruptly. "Harold leaves us something of actual value and saddles her with a liability. Typical." "There's one more thing," Brennan said, his tone shifting slightly. He pulled out a sealed envelope, yellowed with age. "Harold left specific instructions that this letter be given to Margaret, along with the deed to the platform. He was quite insistent that she read it privately." Robert scoffed. "Probably an apology for leaving her with his mess." Margaret accepted the envelope with trembling hands, her name written across it in Harold's familiar scrawl. The sight of his handwriting sent a sharp pain through her chest, grief still raw despite the months that had passed. "Is there anything else? Is there anything?" Patricia asked, impatience coloring her voice. "That concludes the will," Brennan confirmed. "Margaret, if you'd like to discuss the oil rig situation, I'd be happy to connect you with someone who handles property disposition. Selling it for scrap might offset some of the tax burden." After the others left, Margaret sat alone with Lily, the envelope heavy in her hands. The little girl looked up at her with eyes too old for her age, eyes that had seen too much grief, too much struggle. "What's an oil rig, Mama?" Lily asked quietly. "It's like a big metal platform in the ocean where they used to drill for oil," Margaret explained, her voice hollow. "But this one doesn't work anymore. Why did Daddy leave it to you?" That was the question, wasn't it? Harold had been a structural engineer who'd spent most of their marriage working on offshore platforms. He'd mentioned Gulf Star Platform 7, occasionally, always with an odd mixture of affection and secrecy. She'd assumed it was just another job site. Nothing more. That evening, in their cramped apartment, where boxes were already stacked for the impending move they couldn't afford, Margaret finally opened Harold's letter. Lily was asleep on the couch, her small frame curled around the stuffed panda that had been her father's last gift. Margaret sat at the kitchen table, hands shaking as she unfolded the pages. "My dearest Margaret, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and I'm so sorry. Sorry for the secrets. Sorry for the distance in our final years. Sorry for leaving you with questions I should have answered while I still could. Gulf Star Platform 7 isn't what everyone thinks it is. Yes, it's decommissioned. Yes, it appears to be nothing more than rusting metal slowly sinking into the Gulf. But Margaret, my love, appearances can be deceiving. 23 years ago, when I was still a young engineer, I worked on that platform's final operational year. The company was shutting down, moving operations to newer facilities. But I discovered something during the decommissioning process, something the company either never knew about or chose to forget. There's a sealed vault in the platform's lower section, accessible only through the main engineering bay. The original platform manager, a man named Vincent Keller, used it to store something valuable. I don't know exactly what, but I found his personal journal during the decommissioning. He wrote about securing the future and insurance that can't be touched. Keller died in a helicopter crash 2 months before the platform was officially closed. No one else knew about the vault. I kept the journal, kept the secret, waited for the right time. But time has a way of slipping through our fingers, doesn't it? The journal is in our safety deposit box at First National Bank, Box 337. The key is taped to the back of Lily's birth certificate frame. I know this sounds insane. I know you're probably reading this surrounded by bills and uncertainty. But please, Margaret, trust me one more time. Go to the platform, find the vault. Whatever's there, it belongs to you now. I love you. I've always loved you, even when I couldn't find the words to say it. Forever yours. Harold. Margaret read the letter 3 times, each pass making her feel more unmoored from reality. A secret vault? Hidden treasure? It sounded like something from one of Lily's adventure books, not real life. She pulled out her phone and searched for Gulf Star Platform 7. The images that appeared showed exactly what Robert had described. A massive, rusting structure rising from the grey waters of the Gulf, its paint peeling, metal corroding, a monument to industrial decay. The few articles she found confirmed it had been abandoned since 2001, deemed too expensive to salvage or properly demolish. The platform sat in international waters, technically owned but practically forgotten, a bureaucratic nightmare that no one wanted to claim or deal with. Margaret looked at the eviction notice on her refrigerator, the stack of overdue bills on the counter, Lily's worn shoes that needed replacing. She thought about the inheritance tax on a worthless structure, about Robert's smug face, about Patricia's cutting laughter. Then she thought about Harold's words, "Trust me, one more time." The next morning, Margaret withdrew the last $300 from her account and took Lily to the bank. The safety deposit box was exactly where Harold had said it would be. Inside, she found a leather journal, aged and salt-stained, its pages filled with dense handwriting and technical diagrams. Vincent Keller's journal. Margaret sat in the bank's private viewing room, Lily coloring quietly beside her, and began to read. What unfolded over the next hour was the story of a man who had seen opportunity in the chaos of a platform shutdown. Keller had been the operations manager during Gulf Star Platform 7's final year. According to his entries, he'd stumbled upon a scheme involving offshore accounts, money laundering, and corporate embezzlement. Rather than report it, he'd blackmailed the parties involved, accumulating a fortune over the course of 6 months. But Keller had been smart. He knew he couldn't simply deposit millions into a bank account without raising suspicion. So he'd done something audacious. He'd converted everything to bearer bonds. If you find this story engaging, Please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. And precious metals, storing them in a custom-built vault he'd installed during supposed routine maintenance on the platform. The final entry was dated the 12th of October 2000, 2 days before his death. The vault is sealed. The combination is based on coordinates, the latitude and longitude of where I met my wife, where my son was born, and where my daughter said her first word. Everything I've built, everything I've secured, it's for them. When the time is right, they'll know where to look. But Keller had died before he could tell anyone. His family, mentioned throughout the journal, had presumably spent the last 23 years unaware that a fortune sat rusting in the Gulf. Margaret's hands shook as she closed the journal. The entries were detailed, specific, describing exact locations within the platform's lower decks. If Harold had found this journal, he would have known exactly where the vault was. So why hadn't he retrieved it himself? She found the answer in a loose page. Tucked into the back of the journal, Harold's handwriting scrawled in pen. Discovered the journal during final decommissioning inspection, 2001. Searched for 3 days but couldn't access the lower decks. Flooding, structural damage, too dangerous alone. Planned to return with proper equipment, but Gulfstar was officially condemned 6 months later. Became legally complicated. Decided to wait until I could figure out a legitimate approach. 20 years later, still waiting, still planning. Always tomorrow. Margaret, if you're reading this, don't make my mistake. Don't let fear or doubt, or tomorrow, steal what should be yours. The platform is dangerous, yes, but so is drowning in debt with our daughter's future hanging in the balance. A sound escaped Margaret's throat, something between a laugh and a sob. Harold, ever the cautious planner, had spent 2 decades contemplating how to claim a fortune while she and Lily struggled. The irony was almost unbearable. "Mama?" Lily looked up, from her coloring. Concerned. "Are you sad?" Margaret wiped her eyes, straightening her shoulders. "No, baby. I'm just thinking." That evening, Margaret made a phone call to the only person she knew with offshore experience. Tommy Rodriguez, a former colleague of Harold's, who ran a small marine salvage company out of New Orleans. Margaret Chen, Tommy's voice came through, warm with surprise. "I heard about Harold. I'm so sorry for your loss." "Thank you, Tommy. I need help with something unusual." She explained the situation, leaving out the part about hidden treasure, describing the platform as property she'd inherited and needed to inspect before deciding whether to sell it for scrap. Tommy was quiet for a long moment. Gulfstar Platform 7. That old ghost. "Margaret, that platform's been sitting out there for 23 years. The structural integrity is probably shot. It's not safe. I understand, but I need to see it for myself. Just once. Can you help me?" Another pause. "It'll cost you fuel, equipment, my time. Call it $500 minimum." $500 she didn't have. Margaret closed her eyes, thinking of the coins in Lily's piggy bank, the few pieces of jewelry she had left. "I can get it. When can we go?" "Weather's supposed to be clear this weekend. Saturday morning, 6 a.m. sharp. Dock 17, New Orleans Marina." "Margaret?" "Yes? Whatever you're looking for out there, I hope you find it." Harold was a good man. He deserved better than how things ended. After hanging up, Margaret sat in the growing darkness of their apartment, the weight of what she was about to do settling over her. She was going to take their last resources, drag her daughter to Louisiana, and chase what might be nothing more than a dead man's fantasy. Patricia's voice echoed in her memory. "You bought worthless junk." Maybe she was right. Maybe this was insane. Maybe Margaret was about to make everything worse. But then, she looked at Lily, asleep on the couch, her daughter's face peaceful in a way it rarely was when awake. She thought about the eviction notice, the collection calls, the humiliation of Robert's smug superiority, and she thought about Harold's words, "Trust me one more time." The pawnshop owner gave her $300 for her engagement ring. Margaret forced herself not to think about the symbolism, the finality of it. The ring was just metal and stones. The future was what mattered. Her mother's silver bracelet, the one heirloom she'd sworn never to sell, brought another $150. A gold chain Harold had given her for their 5th anniversary, $75. By Friday afternoon, she had $560, enough for Tommy's fee and gas to get them to New Orleans. That night, Margaret sat Lily down and tried to explain what they were about to do. "We're going on an adventure," she said, keeping her voice light. "To see the place where Daddy worked." Lily's eyes widened. "On a boat?" "Yes, on a boat. Out in the ocean." "Is it scary?" Margaret pulled her daughter close, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo. "Sometimes adventures are a little scary, but we'll be together. And we'll be safe." "Mama." Lily's voice was small. "Are we going to be okay?" The question pierced Margaret's heart. Her daughter shouldn't have to worry about such things at 9 years old. "Yes, baby. We're going to be okay." She hoped it wasn't a lie. They drove through the night, Margaret's ancient Honda coughing as they pushed south through Mississippi toward Louisiana. Lily slept in the back seat, bundled in blankets, while Margaret gripped the steering wheel and tried not to think about all the ways this could go wrong. What if the vault was empty? What if Harold had been wrong? What if she was risking everything on a fantasy? But what if he was right? The thought kept her going, mile after exhausting mile. They reached New Orleans just after midnight, too early for the morning departure, but too late to find affordable lodging. Margaret pulled into a rest stop, locked the doors, and tried to sleep upright in the driver's seat, while Lily remained curled in the back. Sleep came in fitful waves, punctuated by the rumble of passing trucks and the whisper of doubt in her mind. At 5:30 a.m., they pulled into the marina. Dawn was just beginning to break, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. The water was calm, almost glassy, reflecting the waking world like a mirror. Tommy's boat was exactly what Margaret expected. A working vessel, sturdy but worn, named Second Chance, in fading letters across the stern. Tommy himself looked older than she remembered, his face weathered by sun and salt, but his smile was genuine. Margaret Chen, right on time. He helped them aboard, his grip strong and sure. And this must be Lily. "Hi," Lily said shyly, clutching her mother's hand. "Ever been on a boat before, little one?" Lily shook her head. "Well, you're in for a treat. We're heading out to see something pretty amazing." As Tommy prepared the boat for departure, Margaret stood at the rail, watching the marina wake up around them. Other vessels were stirring, crews preparing for their own journeys, normal people doing normal work, not chasing desperate fantasies in the Gulf. "You sure about this?" Tommy asked quietly, appearing beside her. "It's not too late to turn back." Margaret thought about the eviction notice, about Robert's smug face, about Harold's letter. "I'm sure." "All right then." Tommy nodded toward the open water. "Let's go find your platform." The journey out took nearly 4 hours. They moved through the coastal waters into the deeper Gulf, civilization falling away behind them until there was nothing but water in every direction. The vastness of it was both beautiful and terrifying. Lily, after an initial bout of seasickness, had recovered and was now sitting in the boat's small cabin, drawing pictures of dolphins she insisted she'd seen jumping in their wake. Margaret stood near the bow, hair whipping in the wind, eyes fixed on the horizon. Tommy had given her binoculars, and she scanned the distance constantly, looking for the first glimpse of Gulf Star Platform 7. "There," Tommy called out around noon, pointing. "Dead ahead." At first, Margaret couldn't distinguish it from the clouds. Then slowly, like something emerging from a dream, the platform materialized. It was massive, far larger than the photos had suggested. A towering structure of rust and decay rising from the water like the skeleton of some ancient metal beast. 4 massive legs disappeared into the Gulf, supporting a main deck that had to be at least 100 feet across. Above that, a secondary deck held what remained of the drilling derrick, its framework twisted and corroded, the entire structure listed slightly to one side, giving it an unsettling appearance of imminent collapse. Sweet Jesus, Tommy breathed. I knew it was big. But this. As they approached, Margaret could see the extent of the damage. Entire sections of railing had fallen away. Windows were shattered or missing entirely. Rust had eaten through metal supports in places, creating gaping holes that looked like wounds. The platform groaned as waves struck its legs, a deep, mournful sound that carried across the water. Margaret, I gotta be honest with you, Tommy said, cutting the engine to let them drift closer. This structure is not safe. Parts of it could give way at any moment. Whatever you need from here, I strongly suggest we find another way. But Margaret was already studying the platform, matching it against the diagrams in Keller's journal. She could see the main deck, the crane equipment still partially intact, and there, the access hatch that led to the lower engineering levels where the vault would be. I need to go aboard, she said quietly. Margaret, Tommy, please. I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important. He studied her face, reading something in her expression. What's really in there? I don't know. Maybe nothing. Maybe everything. Tommy was quiet for a long moment, then sighed. All right. But we do this smart. I've got safety equipment, harnesses, ropes, helmets, and I'm coming with you. Lily stays on the boat with the radio. If anything goes wrong, she can call for help. They spent the next hour preparing. Tommy produced climbing gear that looked like it had seen better days but would serve their purpose. He tested the platform's lowest access ladder, which hung down to just a few feet above the waterline, and pronounced it marginally stable. Lily, baby, Margaret knelt before her daughter, trying to keep her voice steady. I need you to stay here with Mr. Tommy's radio. Can you do that? Lily's eyes were huge with fear. Don't go, Mama. It looks scary. I know, sweetheart. But this is important. I'll be careful. I promise. What if something happens? Margaret pulled her daughter close, breathing in her warmth. Nothing will happen. But if it does, you press this button on the radio and call for help. Okay? Can you be brave for me? Lily nodded against her chest, but Margaret felt her tears soaking through her shirt. The climb up was terrifying. The ladder was slick with algae and rust, each rung a potential betrayal. Margaret forced herself not to look down, focusing only on Tommy's steady voice guiding her from below. That's it. One hand at a time. Don't rush. When she finally hauled herself over the edge onto the main deck, Margaret lay flat for a moment, heart pounding, limbs shaking. The metal beneath her was cold and uneven, sharp edges catching at her clothes. Tommy climbed up behind her, moving with the confidence of someone accustomed to such challenges. You okay? Yeah. Margaret pushed herself to her feet, looking around. The main deck was a wasteland of abandoned equipment and debris. Wind howled through the empty structures, making the metal sing with eerie harmonics. Everything was coated in rust and bird droppings. Salt had crystallized in white patches across every surface. Where to? Tommy asked. Margaret pulled out the journal, hands shaking as she tried to match Keller's diagrams to the real structure. The engineering bay should be through there. They moved carefully across the deck, testing each step before committing their weight. Twice, sections of flooring gave way beneath their feet, forcing them to find alternate routes. The platform groaned continuously, a sound that set Margaret's teeth on edge. The entrance to the engineering bay was a heavy steel door, hanging off one hinge. Tommy had to force it open, metal screeching in protest. Beyond lay darkness, the air inside thick with the smell of rust and stagnant water. Tommy produced flashlights, handing one to Margaret. Stay close. Watch for weak flooring. The engineering bay was a maze of corridors and chambers, everything labeled with faded signs that were barely readable. They passed through rooms filled with abandoned equipment, control panels covered in mold, pipes that had burst and never been repaired, cables hanging loose like vines. Water dripped constantly, echoing through the metal cavern. Their footsteps splashed through puddles of unknown depth. The cold was intense, seeping through their clothes and into their bones. According to the journal, there should be a secondary access corridor here, Margaret said, playing her light over a section of wall. Behind the main cooling system. Tommy examined the area, then began feeling along the wall. There's a seam here. Looks like a door, but I don't see a handle. Margaret checked the journal again, squinting at Keller's handwriting. He mentions a pressure plate. Something about maintenance access protocols. They searched the area, fingers probing every crevice. Margaret was about to give up when her hand pressed against a section of pipe that gave slightly. There was a deep click, and a portion of the wall swung inward on hidden hinges. Well, I'll be damned, Tommy breathed. Beyond the hidden door, a narrow corridor led downward at a steep angle. The smell that emerged was overwhelming. Rust, salt, and something else. Something almost organic in its decay. Margaret, this is getting dangerous. If water's been pooling down there. I have to know, Tommy. Please. He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. All right, but if I say we abort, we abort. Deal? Deal. They descended into the depths of the platform, the corridor becoming narrower and more claustrophobic. The walls here were slick with condensation, and Margaret could hear water moving somewhere in the darkness below. The corridor ended at a small chamber, perhaps 10 feet across. In the center of the far wall stood a vault door, gleaming oddly in their flashlight beams. Unlike everything else on the platform, it showed no sign of rust or decay. It was sealed, pristine, as if it had been installed yesterday. Margaret approached slowly, her breath coming in short gasps. This was it. After months of grief, weeks of planning, hours of terror, here was the moment of truth. The vault door had a digital keypad and a combination dial. Margaret pulled out the journal, finding the page where Keller had hidden his clues. The coordinates of where I met my wife, where my son was born, and where my daughter said her first word. She opened her phone, pulling up a browser. Her hands shook as she typed searches, piecing together Keller's life from scattered obituaries and news articles. Vincent Keller, born 1952, died 2000. Married Sarah Brennan in Boston, 1976. Son Marcus, born in Houston, 1978. Daughter Claudia, born New Orleans, 1982. First word at their summer home in Mobile, Alabama. According to a touching memorial posted by his widow, Margaret converted the coordinates to numbers. Her heart hammering. Boston. Fiorutiu og tvea grun. Shutiu og einugw. Houston. Tutugu og new grun. Newtiu og fimdugw. Mobile. 30 degrees north, 88 degrees west. She tried the first combination, 4,271. The dial clicked, but didn't turn. She tried variations, different orders, different combinations of the digits. 20 minutes passed. 30. Tommy shifted nervously, checking his watch. Margaret, we've been gone almost an hour. We should... Wait. Margaret stared at the journal, at something she'd overlooked. Keller had written the coordinates in a specific way, not just numbers but including minutes and seconds. She tried again. 42212930088. The combination dial turned smoothly, each number clicking into place with a sound that made her whole body tense. The final number. Locked. And there was a deep thunk from within the vault. The heavy door swung open on well-oiled hinges, revealing the darkness inside. Margaret's hands shook as she raised her flashlight. The beam illuminated a space roughly the size of a large closet. But what filled that space made her knees weak. Metal cases, stacked floor to ceiling. Sealed. Containers marked with dates from 2000. And there, along the back wall, rows of boxes that Margaret recognized from her brief experience working in banking before Lily was born. Bearer bonds. Hundreds of them, each certificate representing thousands of dollars in untraceable wealth. "Holy Mother of God," Tommy whispered, his flashlight joining hers. "Margaret, is this bearer bonds?" Margaret's voice came out as barely a whisper. "And those metal cases." She opened the nearest one, hands shaking so badly she could barely work the latches. Inside, nestled in foam, lay gold bars, each one stamped with the marker of a major refinery, each one worth tens of thousands of dollars. Margaret sat down heavily, her legs unable to support her. 23 years. This fortune had been sitting here for 23 years, 47 miles from shore, waiting in the darkness while Vincent Keller's family presumably struggled after his death, while his secret died with him. Until Harold had found the journal. Until Margaret had been desperate enough to believe. "We need to document everything," Tommy said, his training kicking in. "Photos. Inventory. Then we need to figure out how to transport this safely." Margaret could only nod, overwhelmed. She thought of the eviction notice, of Lily waiting terrified on the boat, of Robert's smug face and Patricia's cutting laughter. She thought of Harold's letter. "Trust me one more time." "He knew," she whispered. Harold knew this was here. He believed. They spent the next hour photographing and cataloguing what they found. 15 metal cases of gold, 347 bearer bonds, ranging in value from $10,000 to $100,000 each. And in a smaller case, diamonds, loose gems that sparkled even in the dim flashlight beam. Tommy consulted his phone, doing rough calculations. "Margaret," conservatively, "we're looking at." He paused, rechecking his math. "Jesus! Over $500 million. The number was so large it became meaningless. Margaret couldn't process it, couldn't connect those digits to their current reality of eviction notices and pawned jewelry. "How do we move it?" she asked numbly. "Carefully. Very carefully. And legally." Tommy was already planning. "We'll need lawyers, security, proper documentation. This isn't something we can just load onto my boat and drive away with." "How long?" "Days. Maybe a week if we move fast. We'll need to secure the platform, get authorities involved, prove ownership. Margaret, this is going to get complicated." She thought of Robert's inheritance, $15,000 in coins, granted with such ceremony. She thought of Patricia's laughter, of the lawyer's pitying expression, of everyone who had treated her like a fool for accepting Harold's worthless gift. "Let's start with the basics," Margaret said, standing on shaking legs. "We document everything, we seal it back up, we go back to shore, and we do this right." "Smart," Tommy nodded approvingly. "Your husband would be proud." They secured the vault, taking final photographs of the sealed door. The combination was reset, and Margaret carefully recorded it in 3 separate places. Then they began the long journey back through the platform's intestines, up the narrow corridors, through the engineering bay, and finally onto the main deck, where daylight seemed almost shocking after the darkness below. As they approached the edge where they'd need to descend back to the boat, Margaret heard something that stopped her heart. Crying. "Lily!" She ran to the rail, looking down. The boat was where they'd left it, but Lily wasn't alone. 2 other vessels had arrived. Larger boats with multiple men aboard. They had tied up to Tommy's boat, and one of them was holding Lily, her daughter's face streaked with tears. "Let her go!" Margaret screamed. A man looked up, his face unfamiliar, but his stance threatening. "Mrs. Chen, we've been hoping you'd find what we're looking for. Save us a lot of trouble." "Who are you?" "Salvage rights. Your late husband's platform was declared abandoned property last year. We've got legal claim to anything on board, so why don't you tell us what you found down there?" Margaret felt Tommy tense beside her. "They're lying," he muttered. "There's no way they have legal claim to an actively owned structure." "Doesn't matter if they have guns," Margaret whispered back, noticing the weapons visible on the intruder's boat. "We can do this easy or hard, Mrs. Chen. the man holding Lily called up. Either way, you're telling us where the vault is, and you're sharing what's inside. 50-50 split. Fair deal. Considering you never would have found it without your husband's notes. How do you know about? Margaret stopped. Realization dawning. You've been following me. Since the will reading? Since before that. Been monitoring Harold Chen's communications for 2 years. Man was obsessed with this. The platform. Kept researching, making plans. We knew he'd found something. Then he conveniently died before he could claim it. The casual way he said it made Margaret's blood run cold. You killed Harold. Helicopter accidents happen all the time in the Gulf. Dangerous work. Offshore platforms. The man's smile was visible even from this distance. Now, we can have this conversation civilly. Or, I can start hurting your daughter. Your choice. Margaret's world narrowed to Lily's terrified face. Her daughter's small body, in the grip of a killer. Every instinct screamed to rush down, to put herself between Lily and danger, to give them anything they wanted. Tommy, she whispered. What do we do? We play along. Get close enough to make a move. His hand moved to his belt, where Margaret now saw he carried a diving knife. When I say go, you grab Lily and jump overboard. Swim away from the boats, toward the platform legs. I'll handle the rest. There are 4 of them. I know. Tommy's jaw was set. But they're not expecting resistance from an old salvage hand. Element of surprise. Tick-tock, Mrs. Chen, the man called up. I'm losing patience. All right. Margaret forced her voice steady. All right. We'll show you. Just don't hurt her. They descended the ladder slowly, Margaret's mind racing through possibilities. Maybe they could negotiate. Maybe these men would actually honor a 50-50 split. Maybe. She reached the boat and immediately went to Lily, who broke free and ran to her mother, sobbing. Margaret held her tight, feeling her daughter's heart racing against her chest. Good choice, the leader said. He was younger than Margaret expected, maybe 30, with cold eyes that held no warmth. Now, let's talk about what you found. First, I want to know who you are. Who hired you? Does it matter? It matters to me. The man shrugged. Name's Carson. Work for some investors who heard rumors about Gulfstar Platform 7. Your husband wasn't as careful as he thought with his research. Left digital trails, made calls to the wrong people. When we realized he'd found something significant, we arranged his accident, then waited for you to lead us to the treasure. The casual admission of murder made Margaret want to scream, to launch herself at him. But she felt Lily trembling in her arms and forced herself to stay calm. It's in a vault. Lower engineering deck, hidden behind the main cooling system. And you can get us in? I have the combination. Carson smiled. Perfect. Then, here's how this works. My men and I go in with you. You open the vault. We take 90%. You keep 10. More than fair, considering we could just throw you overboard right now. You said 50-50, Tommy interjected. I lied. Carson's smile didn't waver. 10% of whatever's in there is still more than a widow and her daughter had yesterday. Take it or leave it. Margaret thought fast. 10% of 500 million was still 50 million more money than she could spend in 10 lifetimes. But these men had killed Harold. They'd threatened Lily. They thought they could take what was rightfully hers through intimidation and violence. And they had no idea that she was too tired, too desperate, and too angry to be intimidated anymore. Fine, she said. 10%. But I need assurances. Something in writing that you won't hurt us after we show you the vault. Carson laughed. Lady, you're not in a position to negotiate. Actually, I am. Because I'm the only one who knows the combination. And if you hurt my daughter, I'll die before I tell you. The standoff held for a long moment. Carson's expression hardened, then eased into something like respect. All right, we'll put it in writing. After we secure what's in the vault, you and your daughter go free. You keep your 10%. We never see each other again. Deal? Deal. They drafted a crude agreement on a piece of notebook paper. Carson's handwriting, and large and blocky. It wouldn't hold up in any court, but Margaret needed him to believe she thought it would. 4 of Carson's men accompanied them back up to the platform, leaving one behind with Lily. Margaret looked back at her daughter, memorizing her face, praying this wasn't the last time she'd see it. The journey back through the platform's corridors took longer with the additional people. Carson's men were nervous, constantly checking behind them, hands on their weapons. They weren't experienced salvage workers, they were thugs playing at treasure hunting. Margaret filed that observation away, along with every other detail that might prove useful. They reached the vault chamber, and Carson whistled low. Well maintained. Keller was smarter than we thought. You knew about Keller? Margaret asked. Knew about the rumors. Offshore theft, missing corporate funds, but never could confirm where he'd stashed it. Carson gestured to the vault. After you, Mrs. Chen. Margaret approached the combination lock, her hands steady now. She'd made her choice. Whatever happened next, she'd given Lily a chance. She entered the combination. The lock turned. The vault door swung open. Jesus Christ! One of Carson's men breathed. They stared at the fortune in stunned silence. Gold gleaming in their flashlight beams. Bearer bonds stacked in neat rows. The diamonds catching and refracting light like captured stars. Carson was the first to move, pushing past Margaret to enter the vault. His men followed, hands already reaching for the cases of gold. Tommy, Margaret whispered. Now. Not yet. Wait for them to be distracted. Carson turned back to them, a metal case in his hands. You actually found it. I honestly didn't think. He stopped, noticing something on the floor of the vault. A metal box, smaller than the others, with a red warning label. What's that? He demanded. Margaret had seen it too during their inventory, but hadn't opened it. I don't know. Open it. I don't think. Open it. Margaret stepped forward, her heart hammering. She knelt and lifted the box carefully. It was heavier than expected, and there was a faint clicking sound from inside. Very slowly, she opened the lid. Inside, nestled in foam, was a timer. Ancient, mechanical, but still functional. And it was counting down. 2:47. 2:46. 2:45. What the hell is that? Carson's voice rose. Margaret stared at the device, at the wires running from it to what looked like several bricks of C4 explosive. Her mind raced back to Keller's journal, to a passage she'd dismissed as paranoia. Insurance against thieves. The vault is trapped. Opening the inner chamber without proper authorization triggers a 3-minute countdown. Deactivation code is my wedding anniversary. Entered on the secondary keypad behind the left panel. It's a bomb, Margaret said quietly. Keller booby-trapped the vault. Then disarm it. Carson grabbed her shoulder, shaking her. I don't know how. The journal mentioned a deactivation code. But then we run. One of Carson's men was already backing toward the door. Wait! Margaret's mind worked frantically. His wedding anniversary. The journal said it was his wedding anniversary. So enter it. I don't know the date. 2:12. 2:11. 2:10. Panic erupted. Carson's men scrambled for the door, pushing each other in their desperation. Carson himself stood frozen, staring at the fortune he'd killed for, now seconds away from being destroyed. Tommy grabbed Margaret's arm. We run. Now. Lily's still on the boat. Then we get to her faster than they do. Move. They ran. Through the corridor, up the stairs, through the engineering bay. Behind them, they could hear Carson and his men, their footsteps echoing in panic. 1:13. 1:12. Margaret's lungs burned. Her legs felt like lead, but she pushed harder, thinking only of Lily. They burst onto the main deck, just as the man guarding the boats looked up in surprise. Tommy didn't hesitate. He launched himself over the rail, knife in hand. Margaret was right behind him. hitting the water in a painful belly flop that knocked the wind from her lungs. She surfaced, gasping, saw Lily being pulled back by the guard, and swam with everything she had. Tommy reached the boat first, pulling himself up with surprising agility for a man his age. The guard turned, raising his weapon, but Tommy's knife was faster. Margaret hauled herself aboard, grabbed Lily, and dove back into the water on the far side of the boat. "Swim toward the platform legs," Tommy shouted, right behind them. "Away from the boats. 032. 031. They swam, Lily's small arms wrapped around Margaret's neck, both of them kicking frantically. The platform legs rose from the water like metal trees, offering the only cover available. Carson's men had reached their boats, engines roaring to life. But they were panicked, disorganized, trying to untie from Tommy's boat, while also trying to escape. 010, 09. Margaret reached the nearest platform leg, pulling Lily behind it, Tommy arriving a second later. They pressed against the cold metal, gasping for breath. The explosion, when it came, was both larger and smaller than Margaret expected. It originated deep within the platform, the sound muffled by layers of metal and water. But the shockwave that followed was tremendous. The entire platform shuddered, metal groaned. Somewhere above, something heavy crashed down. The water around them churned, waves radiating outward from the blast. Then came the secondary explosions. The initial blast had ruptured gas lines, ignited oil that had pooled in various chambers, triggered a cascade of failures throughout the aging structure. The platform's groan became a shriek. One of the massive support legs buckled, metal tearing like paper. The entire structure began to list, slowly at first, then with gathering speed. "It's coming down!" Tommy shouted. "We need to get clear!" They swam, frantically, Lily between them, as the platform began its death throes. Carson's boats had managed to break free and were speeding away. But they weren't fast enough. The platform's upper section collapsed first, the drilling derrick toppling sideways. It hit the water with a sound like thunder, sending up a geyser of spray that obscured everything. Margaret kept swimming, one arm around Lily, following Tommy's lead. Her muscles screamed. Salt water burned her eyes. But she didn't stop. The main deck followed, pancaking downward as the support legs gave way. The sound was indescribable, screeching metal, roaring water, the deep bass rumble of a structure that had stood for decades, finally surrendering to gravity and the sea. A wave caught them, generated by the collapsing platform, lifting and carrying them away from the disaster. Margaret held Lily tightly, both of them tumbling in the churning water. When they surfaced, gasping and sputtering, the platform was gone. Where Gulf Star, Platform 7 had stood, there was only debris, floating metal, oil slicks, and waves still radiating outward from the catastrophic collapse. Carson's boats were nowhere to be seen. "Tommy!" Margaret called out, spinning in the water. "Tommy! Here!" His voice came from nearby. He appeared from behind a floating piece of decking, one hand pressed to his side. "I'm okay. Your boat?" They spotted the second chance, floating nearby, miraculously undamaged. The swim to it felt impossibly long, but finally, they hauled themselves aboard, collapsing onto the deck in exhausted relief. Lily was sobbing, clinging to Margaret with desperate strength. "Mama, Mama, Mama, I'm here, baby. We're okay. We're safe." "Are they gone?" Lily's voice was tiny. "The bad men." Margaret looked out at the debris field, saw no sign of the other boats. "Yes, sweetheart. They're gone." Tommy was on his radio, calling for Coast Guard assistance. His voice was steady, despite the blood Margaret could now see, seeping through his shirt. "Tommy, you're hurt. Knife wound. Not deep. I've had worse." He managed a weak smile. "That was the most insane salvage job I've ever been part of. Are you sure there was nothing about a bomb in that journal?" Margaret thought back, replaying Keller's words. Then it hit her. He said the vault was trapped, but he was talking about the inner chamber. There was another door inside. behind where the bearer bonds were. We never opened it. The combination lock we used just opened the outer vault. So, the treasure is at the bottom of the gulf now, along with the platform, the bombs, and everything Keller tried to protect. Tommy stared at her. You're telling me $500 million just sank? Yes. And Carson and his men, if they got away. Margaret trailed off, but they both knew it was unlikely anyone had survived the platform's collapse. Lily lifted her head from Margaret's chest. Mama? Did we lose everything Daddy wanted us to have? The question pierced Margaret's heart. They'd been so close. For a brief, shining moment, she'd held the solution to all their problems in her hands. And now it was gone, buried under tons of metal at the bottom of the gulf. I don't know, baby. She stopped, reached into her jacket pocket. Her fingers closed on something she'd taken from the vault before entering the combination, something she'd tucked away without thinking. Her hand emerged, holding 3 bearer bonds, each one marked with a face value of $100,000. During the chaos, while Carson and his men were distracted by the bomb, while everyone was running for their lives, Margaret had grabbed the first things her hands touched. $300,000, not $500 million, not even close to the fortune they'd briefly possessed. But $300,000 was a life raft in a sea of debt. It was hope. It was a future. Tommy saw what she held and started laughing, a sound tinged with hysteria and relief. Mrs. Chen, you beautiful, crazy woman. You actually grabbed some on the way out? I didn't mean to. Margaret stared at the bonds, hardly daring to believe they were real. Do you know what the best part is? Tommy was grinning now, despite his wound. Those are bearer bonds. Untraceable. As good as cash to anyone who holds them. Carson wanted 10%? You just walked away with 0.006% of the total. And it's all yours, free and clear. The Coast Guard arrived within the hour, along with emergency response teams and investigators. The story Margaret told was simple. She'd inherited a decommissioned platform, came to inspect it, was attacked by salvage pirates, and the structure collapsed during the confrontation. All technically true. They found one survivor from Carson's boats, clinging to debris and babbling about explosions and treasure. His ravings about secret vaults and hidden gold were dismissed as shock-induced delusions. No bodies were recovered. The platform was officially declared a total loss, its remains too deep and too dispersed to salvage. Margaret was treated for minor injuries and released. Tommy's knife wound required stitches but wasn't serious. Lily, miraculously, was physically unharmed, though she clung to Margaret for days afterward, afraid to let her mother out of sight. The investigation into Harold's death was reopened based on Carson's confession, which Margaret had recorded on her phone before ascending to the vault. The recording was poor quality, barely audible, but combined with Tommy's testimony and the investigation into Carson's criminal organization, it was enough. Harold Chen's death was officially ruled a homicide. His name was cleared of any suspicion of financial impropriety, and Margaret finally had the truth she'd needed. Her husband had been murdered for trying to secure their future. 3 weeks later, Margaret sat in the office of a private banker in Houston, the 3 bearer bonds laid out on the desk between them. These are quite old, the banker observed, examining them through a jeweler's loupe. But they appear authentic. Of course, I'll need to verify with the issuing institution. Of course. May I ask how you came to possess them? Margaret had prepared for this question. They were left to me by my late husband, part of an inheritance I only recently discovered. The banker nodded, asking no further questions. People who dealt in bearer bonds understood that anonymity was part of their appeal. The total value, including accumulated interest, comes to $347,000, the banker announced after completing his verification. How would you like to proceed? Margaret thought of the eviction notice she'd torn up 2 weeks ago. She thought of Robert's shocked face when he'd heard about Harold's murder and the platform's collapse. She thought of Patricia's attempts to reach out, suddenly friendly now that Margaret's story had made national news. "I'd like to establish 2 accounts, a college fund for my daughter and a general savings account in my name." Excellent choices. The banker began preparing paperwork. "You know, Mrs. Chen, $300,000, properly invested, can provide a very comfortable life. Not extravagant, but secure." Secure. The word resonated through Margaret's chest. Security was all she'd wanted. Not wealth beyond measure, not vindication against her in-laws, not even justice for Harold, though that mattered too. Just security. The knowledge that Lily would have a roof over her head, food on the table, and the chance to grow up without fear. That afternoon, Margaret took Lily to a small apartment she'd rented in a good school district. It had 2 bedrooms, a kitchen that actually worked, and windows that let in sunlight. It was nothing fancy, but it was theirs. "Is this our new home, Mama?" Lily asked, walking from room to room with wondering eyes. "Yes, baby, this is home." "For how long?" Margaret knelt down, taking her daughter's hands. "For as long as we want. No one can take it away from us. We're safe now." Lily threw her arms around Margaret's neck, holding tight. "I was so scared on the boat. I thought they were going to hurt you." "I know. I was scared too. But you went anyway. To find what Daddy left us." "Yes. Did we find it? The treasure?" Margaret thought of the vault at the bottom of the gulf, of the fortune that had been lost, of the 3 bearer bonds that had saved them. "We found enough, sweetheart. We found enough." That night, after Lily was asleep in her new bedroom, Margaret sat alone in the small living room. Harold's letter spread before her. She read it again, these words she'd memorized but needed to see. "Trust me, one more time." "I did," Margaret whispered to the empty room, to the ghost of her husband, to the memory of what they'd had. "I trusted you, and you were right. Not about the full treasure, not about any of it going perfectly, but you were right that there was something worth finding." She thought of Carson and his men, consumed by greed, literally destroyed by their desperate pursuit of wealth. She thought of Vincent Keller, so paranoid about protecting his stolen fortune that he'd rigged it to self-destruct rather than fall into the wrong hands. And she thought of Harold, who had sat on the secret for 20 years, planning and scheming, and never quite finding the courage to act, until it was too late. $300,000 wasn't $500 million. But it was one, honestly, claimed at great risk, and it was enough to build a life on. More importantly, it was bought with truth. Harold's murder solved, Carson's organization exposed, justice served even if imperfectly. The next morning, Margaret received a call from a lawyer representing Vincent Keller's estate. Apparently, the publicity around the platform's destruction had caught the attention of Keller's surviving family. "They'd like to meet with you," the lawyer explained, "to discuss what was found and lost." Margaret agreed, curious about the family that had unknowingly waited 23 years for a fortune that no longer existed. The meeting took place in a coffee shop in Mobile, Alabama. Keller's widow, Sarah, was 78 now, frail but sharp-eyed. His son, Marcus, 52, carried himself with the wary defensiveness of someone expecting disappointment. His daughter, Claudia, 43, watched Margaret with unconcealed curiosity. "Thank you for meeting with us," Sarah began, her voice wavering slightly with age. "We've read the news stories about the platform, the vault, the explosion." "I'm sorry," Margaret said. "I know your husband meant that money for you. If there had been any way to save it—" "My husband stole that money," Sarah interrupted firmly. "Blackmailed people, broke the law, put his family at risk with his schemes. I'm not sorry, it's gone. I'm relieved." The bluntness of the statement shocked Margaret. "But what I want to know," Sarah continued, "is if you found anything else. Vincent kept a journal. He mentioned it once, before he died. Said it contained the truth about everything he'd done. Did you find it?" Margaret thought of the journal in her safety deposit box, its pages filled with Keller's confessions and schemes. I did. My husband found it first, during the platform's decommissioning. Is it destroyed? No. It survived. Sarah exchanged glances with her children. We'd like to read it. Not to claim anything. God knows we've made our peace with living without Vincent's blood money. But we never knew the full truth. He died before he could explain, before he could apologize. That journal might give us closure. Margaret understood that need viscerally. She'd spent months searching for truth about Harold's death, unable to rest until she knew what had happened. How could she deny Keller's family the same closure? I'll send it to you, she promised. But I should warn you, it's not pleasant reading. Your husband did things that... We know. Marcus spoke for the first time, his voice rough. We've spent 23 years knowing he was involved in something dark, unable to prove anything or understand why. Whatever's in that journal, it can't be worse than the not knowing. They talked for another hour, sharing stories of their respective losses. Sarah spoke of Vincent's gradual transformation from the idealistic young man she'd married to the paranoid schemer he'd become. Margaret shared Harold's own struggles, his 20-year obsession with the platform, his ultimate sacrifice. As they prepared to leave, Claudia pulled Margaret aside. My father's last words to me were, "Take care of your mother." I've spent my whole adult life trying to figure out what he meant, if there was some hidden instruction, some clue to his secrets. And now, I think he just meant what he said. Take care of the people who matter. Let the rest go. Claudia managed a smile. Your husband left you a rusted platform and a wild treasure hunt, but what he really left you was the courage to fight for your future. That's worth more than any vault of gold. The words stayed with Margaret as she drove home, Lily beside her, both of them quiet with their own thoughts. 6 months passed. Margaret's life settled into a rhythm that felt almost mundane after the chaos of the platform. She found a job managing accounts for a small firm, work that used her old skills and paid enough to supplement the interest from their savings. Lily thrived in her new school, making friends and slowly losing the haunted look that had shadowed her since Harold's death. The media interest faded. Carson's criminal organization was prosecuted based on Margaret's recording and Tommy's testimony. 3 other murders were connected to them, including another engineer who'd worked on Gulfstar Platform 7. Robert Chen called once, attempting reconciliation. Margaret let it go to voicemail. Patricia sent a gift basket with a note of apology. Margaret donated it to a women's shelter. Some wounds healed, others just scarred over, visible reminders of battles fought and survived. One evening, as Margaret was making dinner, Lily appeared in the kitchen doorway with a drawing she'd made at school. It's our family, Lily explained, pointing to the stick figures. That's you, that's me, and that's Daddy, watching over us. Margaret studied the drawing. Harold's figure stood apart from theirs, but lines connected them, golden threads linking the family even across the boundary of death. That's beautiful, baby. My teacher asked what made me happy. I said, knowing Daddy wanted us to be safe, and that you were brave enough to make it happen. Margaret pulled her daughter close, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo, feeling the steady rhythm of her heartbeat. This was the treasure, she realized. Not the gold that had been lost, not even the bonds that had saved them. This moment, this child, this life they'd built from ruins. You know what? Margaret said. I think we should celebrate. Celebrate what? Everything. Being alive, being together, being brave. They went out for ice cream, laughing over sundaes that were far too large, making plans for Lily's upcoming birthday, talking about the future with the kind of casual optimism that had once seemed impossible. As they walked home through the warm evening, Lily's hand in hers, Margaret thought about all the moments that had led them here. Harold's death, the will reading, Robert's smug face, the rusted platform rising from the gulf, the vault door swinging open, the desperate swim as everything exploded around them. Each moment had been necessary. Each choice had mattered. Each step had brought them to this simple evening, walking home with ice cream on their breath, and stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. "Mama?" Lily asked. "Do you think Daddy knows we're okay?" Margaret looked up at those emerging stars, each one a distant sun burning in the darkness. "I think he knows. I think he's proud of us. I'm proud of us too." That simple statement, delivered with 9-year-old certainty, made Margaret's chest tight. "Me too, baby. Me too." Years later, when Lily was in college studying marine biology, she would come across a research paper about the environmental impact of decommissioned offshore platforms. Among the examples cited was Gulf Star Platform 7, described as a notable case study of catastrophic structural failure. The paper mentioned rumors of hidden treasure, dismissed as urban legend unsupported by evidence. It noted that salvage operations had recovered nothing of significant value from the debris field. Lily would smile at those words, thinking of the 3 bearer bonds that had changed her and her mother's lives. She would think of the fortune at the bottom of the Gulf, lost forever, and feel only relief that they'd escaped with their lives and enough to build a future. But that was years away. For now, Margaret and Lily walked home through the evening, their shadows stretching long behind them, their path forward clear and unencumbered. The rusted oil rig was gone, buried under water and time. Carson and his men were dead or imprisoned. The treasure was lost, scattered across the ocean floor. But Margaret Chen had found something more valuable: the knowledge that she was strong enough to fight for her daughter, brave enough to face danger, and resilient enough to build a life from the smallest of victories. $300,000 wasn't $500 million. The inheritance wasn't what anyone expected. The story didn't end with limitless wealth or perfect justice, but it ended with a mother and daughter safe, together, facing their future with hope instead of fear. And sometimes, that's treasure enough. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.